If I had advice to give to anyone who's more than 50 forward about things that you can do that you've never done before, learn to yodel, learn to whistle, learn to do something you've never done before, because it is never too late. It's never too late. Just do it.
That was Bernie Sheahan. Bernie's career includes public relations, radio promotions, and a long-running and well-lived column in the Nashville Scene. Her writing is reminiscent of Irma Bombeck as she takes everyday topics and adds heart and perspective that is so unique to the circumstances as she sees them. Sheahan's life, like ours, is peppered with ups and downs. Her battle with mental illness brought some of her traditional work to a stop, and had it not been for TennCare, she might not be with us today. Her journey of coming full circle and reinventing herself is noteworthy and inspiring. In this podcast, we'll learn about how she manages her mental health, how coaching middle school sports has given her a second wind at 60-something, and why being a caregiver for her mother sparked a whole new understanding of life.
I'm Sally Hussey, the CEO of 50 Forward, and we're glad you joined us to hear inspiring stories from older adults. Their words of wisdom are well worth sharing as we seek to navigate a meaningful and purpose-driven second chapter in our life. This podcast is made possible through the work of 50 Forward and our mission to support, champion, and enhance the lives of those 50 and older.
Today's Squeeze the Day is brought to you by the All of Us Research Program from the National Institutes of Health. Learn how you can help change the future of health by participating in the program. Visit www.joinallofus.org to learn more. I'm Susan Sizemore, Communications Director of 50 Forward. So let's get started. Welcome, Bernie.
Thank you, Susan. It's great to be here.
I love your hat. Many people can't see it, but you're wearing a 50 Forward hat. Very nice touch.
Thank you. I'm like more than 50 forward now, and I'm not sure what the word is we could use for it, like 60 sliding or something. I'm not sure.
Bernie, tell us a little bit about your roots.
They're kind of complicated. I was born in Texas, and we didn't live there long. We weren't Texas people. My mother's from Massachusetts. My dad is from an Irish Catholic farm family in Kansas, a really big one. I'm one of 40 grandchildren on Dad's side. I was a kid in Massachusetts, and then we moved to California. Lived in Sacramento for a while and moved to the Bay Area in 1967. And after just the year after college, I moved to Nashville. But my roots are deep in the Kansas soil, in Ireland, and the Azores Islands.
Tell us a little bit about Nashville and what brought you here. And then I'm thinking it was likely back in your early PR days, maybe even with the contemporary Christian music that I really got to know you. But I'd love to know a little bit about your early work history.
Well, I was thinking about my earliest work history besides working at a sandwich shop. I was Bugs Bunny at Marriott's Great America, which was great fun.
Unreal.
Yes. I did all the Warner Brothers characters, but I was the main Bug, so I did promotional appearances as Bugs and things. So that's the super early work history. Did that through college. But I worked for a record company right after college in LA, Sparrow Records, which is now in Nashville. And at the time, the Christian music industry was very young. There were just a few labels. So there weren't very many radio promotion people. So when CBS was starting a new label called Priority Records in Nashville, they hired me away from Sparrow. And I came to interview in Nashville, get a load of this, in August. And I was on a red-eye flight, and I got off the plane, got out of the airport, and was greeted with, let's call it an atmospheric hug. It was so hot and so humid, and I'd never felt humidity quite like that. But we drove around, and one of the things that I really loved about Nashville was that I saw all these old buildings and historical plaques, which I always stop and read. And I thought, a city that loves and owns its history is a place that I could live. And Nashville got its hooks in me pretty soon, because my original plan was, well, I'll work for CBS in Nashville, help start the label, and then I'll transfer back to the LA office in, a year and a half or so. But 25 years later, I loved Nashville right away. I loved the South. The way I put it is I'm a Tennifornian. I'm a Tennifornia girl. I'm both. I'm both. But when you and I met, we were PR professionals at the same time, way back when, and worked on the Homecoming 86 campaign, which you may recall, which was a delight. And then I was the PR director at Union Station in 1986 during the renovation and the first year of operation until they went Chapter 13 and started firing management. But yeah, and that was one of the great treasures. I feel I was only, let's say, 5 years into my life in Nashville, and I got to work on Homecoming 86 and some other Tennessee aspects with the state of Tennessee through the PR firm, which was great. We did the Tennessee Homecoming train, and at the end of the train, it went from Johnson City to Memphis. It had 11 stops along the way where we pull off and do a show. So I was on the train for the first time when we were going into Memphis where it was ending. And we had Carl Perkins on the train and Ace Cannon, the saxophone player. And earlier on the train, we'd had Minnie Pearl and Alex Haley. Well, you know how when you're in PR, you're never supposed to be in the picture, right? You're supposed to be behind the scenes. Yes. But the governor asked me, as we were, 50 minutes from Memphis, he said, do you think you could put the musicians together and have a sing-along? And I could not help myself. I couldn't help myself. I jumped up, sat on the table with them and started singing harmony. So it was so much fun that I could say that I sang Blue Suede Shoes with Carl Perkins on a train going into Memphis. And then, as you know, something that made me very nervous the next day is waking up at the Peabody Hotel and having the Memphis Commercial Appeal newspaper right there, opening up and seeing my face with Carl Perkins. Me and Carl Perkins on the train. And I'm thinking, oh, that's it. I'm getting fired. That was one of my great Nashville moments.
Tell us a bit about being a journalist and storytelling, and specifically, you had a column in the Nashville Scene called Hot Home. So just thought we might talk a little bit about that and how it came about.
Well, I didn't have this burning desire to be a writer or to be a journalist. It just kind of happened. I was trying to finish my degree. I was going to Belmont, and I had a friend who called and said, hey, could you write some bios for us? And I said, sure, because I used to be in the music biz. So I started writing bios, and then my friend Terry Knott, who at the time worked for another PR company, said to somebody at the Nashville Scene, they were looking to do a real estate column, but a little friendlier. So she said, I know just the one, call Bernie Sheahan. And so the column was called Hot Homes, and the intention was to build up real estate advertising in the back of the paper. And what happened was, after about 2, maybe 3, I started writing less about the house and more of whatever the heck I felt like. And so my editor said, just write whatever the heck you want. So I did. So as long as I fitted the house in there somewhere, and it sold lots of houses, and the real estate section did get built up a lot. But it was a surprisingly popular column, and I talked about personal things. So I had a lot of fun with that column, and I wrote about 300 of them. And the only reason I stopped was deciding to go to grad school at Ole Miss. They wanted to syndicate it, but it was so local that they couldn't. And you can't find it online, because the week after I moved to Oxford, that's when the Scene went on the internet. I found my voice as a writer at the Nashville Scene, and I will always be grateful to Bruce Doby and Albie Del Favro for letting me do that.
So that brings me to another column that you wrote, and I think this was a cover story, correct me if I'm wrong, but the title was A Beautiful Mind's Uncertain Future, and I wanted you to tell us a little bit more about that and your journey.
that was another thing that I never would have done by myself. What had happened was that I was hospitalized over Christmas in 1991. It was actually the day after the Nashville Scene Christmas party, which is telling. I had been depressed for a long time, but not very many people knew except a few very close friends. And that morning after the Scene Christmas party, I'd had quite a bit to drink, and I'm not really a drinker, but I was just pouring on the pain that night, trying to forget my depression. And it didn't help, believe you me. But I woke up that morning thinking that if there had been a gun on my nightstand, I would have used it. And that scared the heck out of me. So I picked myself up and I drove. I don't know how I got there, but I drove to a friend's house, my friend Melinda Scruggs, and I told her, and then I cried. And I thought that I hugged her and cried for 30 minutes. And she told me later, I think, that it was 3 hours that I cried. So she and my friend Terry Knott took me to the hospital. They found out where they could take me, and I went to Hendersonville Hospital. And it was a life-changing experience, to say the least. It was the worst experience of my life, but it brought me back to life. And I tell you, at the time and for many years, and I believe it was largely related to my ADHD and the sense of failure, and there's such a shame element. And so that shame of, I can't get my life together, that caused depression for me, I know, and the sense of being a failure. And I used to wake up in the morning thinking that somebody somewhere was mad at me about something, which is an awful way to wake up. And I found out through my hospitalization and my recovery that that wasn't true. So I don't think that anymore. I give myself a lot more grace. But the story came about because one day my editor, Liz Garrigan, called me at home and said, hey, guess what? They're talking about reducing funding for TennCare for mental health. And I think you should go down to the committee meeting and check it out. So I threw on grown-up clothes and went downtown to the Capitol and sat in on a committee, the Finance Committee hearing about cutting off funds, basically, for those who are severely and persistently mentally ill. That's SPMI, and I fall under that category. So I was horrified when I was listening to the people talk in the committee room. And there were two people from, you call it NAMI or NAMI, depending on where in the country you're from, but the state director was there and also the national field director who happened to live in Hendersonville. She was there too, making the case. And I talked to them both afterwards and told them my story and what I was doing for the scene. So I called my editor and said, Liz, it's terrible. I got to tell you about it. Come on down. So I went to the office. I told her all about it. And she said, okay, you got the cover story, 5,000 words. It's due Friday. And I want you to tell not just the TennCare story, but your journey. Okay. So I did. And that was Monday. It was due Friday. And actually, the great thing about having the good medications was that I was able to not wait until the last minute. I actually wrote it over the course of 4 days, which was unusual for me. It took a lot out of me to write it. When I finished it, that weekend, I kind of had a meltdown because it was so emotionally draining. It turned out to be a very good thing because of the response that we had to the story. The scene had more letters in response to that story than almost any other story that they'd ever published. And it was really heartwarming to see people write in and say, I never understood my sister with bipolar disorder, and now I get it. Thank you for telling your story. Thank you for telling my story, because I've never been able to admit that I have a mental illness. So it was incredibly rewarding. And another great thing that happened because of the story is that it did have a great effect on the legislators. The directors of NAMI said, let's go to the Capitol. Will you go to the Capitol with us? We're going to bring your story. We're going to have a little kit with the Nashville Scene in it. And that was a few days after the story came out. So we went to the Capitol very early in the morning. And you won't believe this, but I think we had 27 or 29 meetings that day from early morning until evening. We talked to 29 different people who had an influence on the legislation. And one of them was the lieutenant governor. He was grateful that I told the story. And I remember going into somebody's office, I think it was the chairman of the finance committee, and saying, you know what? If we lose that funding, here's what's going to happen. You're going to have people that are okay now and stable who will be in emergency rooms because they can't get their medication and they go off and they are unable to function because of having these great meds that nobody would know that you're mentally ill because you're on these great meds, and then suddenly you can't afford them. Because at one time, before I was on TennCare, I was paying like $600, $700 a month out of pocket just for a few medications. And when you are experiencing severe mental illness, it's hard to work. And when it's hard to work and you're not earning money, paying $700 a month for medications is, that will put you in the hospital having to deal with those things. And so I went to the vote, and I was on pins and needles, to say the least. I was literally pacing back and forth in the balcony upstairs while they were taking the vote, and they approved to keep the funding for mental health. When I think about it now, I cry because the story was so much bigger than me. The power of that story, as it turned out, affected so many people. That year, the story and I guess, won all the journalism awards for mental health coverage in the whole state. Just looking back on that, it was, like I said, it was so much bigger than me. And I'm so grateful that I was a part of it.
Let's talk about how you manage your mental health today. And I'm curious also to know if writing is a form of therapy for you.
Oh, yes, definitely. They say that you don't know what you think until you write it down, that this is true for writers. And I'm not a very good journal keeper. And Facebook has something to do with that because I do very long posts on Facebook. I write naturally in 800 words, beginning, middle, and end, having been a columnist for a long time. And so, yes, writing is very therapeutic. And this is how I manage my mental health today. I'm still on really good medication. That is, I think, number one. I used to call running was my fifth medication. And I got injured and I haven't been running as much. By the way, I was so inspired by your guest. Janet Jernigan inspired me so much that I'm going to start running again, really, because she is older than I am. And when she was telling her tale about all the things that she did and still does, that is a kick in the you-know-where to go out and just put my shoes on and run. The thing about if you tell yourself, oh, I can't do it. It's just been so long. I haven't run for months and, I have this little ankle problem. Well, yes, but put your shoes on and go out the door. Walk fast. Run. I coach running, and one of the things I tell my kids is just start by jogging embarrassingly slow. Oh, Coach, I can walk faster than that. I know. Just jog embarrassingly slow, and that will turn into running. That's running. So running has been, and will be again my fifth medication. And coaching keeps me somewhat on the move, but not as if I was actually doing the workouts myself. And I go to therapy on a regular basis, and that's really helpful. Therapy is not a thing to be ashamed of, that is for sure. Now I'm kind of just on a stabilization program because I've been stable for a really long time. And I tell you what, it does help in the last 16 years that I haven't had to worry about paying my bills because I've been taking care of my mom in her house. That is pretty significant. But also, staying in touch with the people who know you and love you and staying in current communication. It's easy with Facebook to think that you're communicating, or with texting that you are really connecting. But as you know, I mean, I am, through the wonders of technology, looking at you right in the face, and I can see your eyes. And that's a lot different than texting you or sending you an email or you reading my Facebook post. And I think that that is crucial. I think that loneliness and a lack of connection causes depression and all kinds of other problems.
You've touched on 2 points that I really wanted to explore a bit with you, and one of them is relating to discovering interests and passions in your second chapter. And tell us a little bit about coaching and what that's done for you.
Oh my goodness. Well, to talk about coaching, I have to take a step back and tell the backstory. Because when I came back here to take care of mom and dad in 2006, we actually came out for their 50th anniversary. My brother lived in Southern Cal, and we found out that dad's cancer, which he'd been living with for a while, was terminal, and he didn't have long. So we just moved in with mom and dad, took care of them, and then dad died a few months later. But while he was still alive, my brother was teaching at San Jose City College, and he came home one day, and he has this flyer that says, wanted runners for cross-country team, females especially, no experience needed. And my brother says, hey, why don't you check this out? And I said, well, okay, first of all, I graduated from college already, and I'm really slow, so they wouldn't want me. Just check it out. So as it turned out, they were really desperate, and so I became a member of the San Jose City College cross-country team at the age of 49 and was the oldest collegiate runner in at least Northern California. And I'm betting it was the whole state. But I got in the best shape of my life. Just a year later, that opportunity was thrust upon me because a friend of mine who worked for a private high school said they really need a cross-country coach. And I told him about you, that you like kids and that you ran cross-country for City College. And I was like, I don't know anything about coaching. But as it turns out, once I got to a middle school the next year, I found my niche, and I love coaching. I love coaching. As I tell people, I'm actually not coaching the sport. I don't coach the sport, I coach the kid. And any middle schooler, here in California, the middle schoolers are 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. I used to substitute teach in Nashville, and it's 5, 6, 7, and 8. But middle school out here, Susan, I think that you could probably agree with me that any middle schooler, any kid who's in 6th, 7th, or 8th grade goes on campus every day thinking that there's something wrong with them. And no matter how good you feel about yourself, there is that element of there's something wrong with me. So I think that my job coaching is, as I walk on campus at 3 o'clock and kids are leaving school, I make it a point to look at all of them and say, hello, how you doing? Even if I don't know them, because everybody needs to know that they're seen. And so that's my thing. I want these kids to know that they're seen. And when I'm actually coaching and spending time with them, I want to know that they're seen and they're heard. And when I walk on campus, I have a little prayer, Lord, help me love them well today. That's, I'm really not a great technical coach. As a matter of fact, I've been coaching cross country since 2009 in middle school. And my confession is this: I don't really know how to use my stopwatch. I coach cross country and track, and I don't really know how to use my stopwatch. But I've coached a lot of championship teams, and here's what matters in middle school is that those kids know that they are loved, and I can fake the stopwatch thing. They're going to remember that somebody cared for them and listened and loved them. And that's what coaching is to me.
You're such a nurturer, and you've already alluded to being a caregiver for your father and a bit for your mom, but I want to talk just a little bit about caregiving and why learning to be a caregiver is such a gift.
Caregiving is the best and worst thing. I actually was a caregiver for my mom for 16 years because she had health problems before my dad died, off and on. And my brother and I shared the caregiving, and it became the most precious thing because I always loved my mom, but thought that we were very different, and I was like my dad, extroverted. And so in my high school years, my college years, I didn't feel close to my mom like some other girls did. I loved her, but we just seemed so different. And come to find out, we're a lot more alike than I thought. And I became more like my mom in these last 16 years than I ever would have dreamed. And she became my best friend. After mom died, I told a lady in her women's club, I said, I lost my best friend. I lost my roommate. I lost my job, and I lost my mom. And this lady said, oh my goodness, those are a lot of losses. I said, yes, but it was just mom. Mom was all those things. My coaching was just a part-time thing. I was her caregiver 24/7. And I lost my mom. And because of the intensity of, I don't have a family, I forgot to get married and have kids, and so did my brother. So we had this very unusual situation of being in mom's house and taking care of her and being her constant companion, basically. And as you can imagine, there are certain things that only a daughter can do, which makes you even closer. I miss her every day, and I cry every day some about her, and some days are harder than others. It's been 7 months, and grief has no timetable, no calendar. The grief that you feel when someone that you've not just loved, but you have cared for all these years, it's so profound. People who were caregivers of their parents told me through these last 16 years, oh, you'll never regret a day of it. And even when they were telling me that, I was saying to myself, I already know that I won't regret a minute of it because it's been so precious. It just makes it all the more difficult to live without her now. But being a caregiver is difficult and rewarding and the most wonderful thing that you can do. I'm just so thankful that I had the ability to stop everything and take care of mom for all those years. And my brother feels the same way.
Do you have any advice for caregivers to take care of themselves?
I'm really glad you asked that question because as a caregiver, you hear that all the time. It's hard to hear people say you need to take care of yourself when you are so focused on the loved one that you're taking care of. And I know that some caregivers are in different situations than mine. They may not be as close to the person they're giving the care to. And I was very fortunate that my mom and I had this sweet and ever sweeter relationship. So that was never an issue. I think that emotionally, it's hard to say, I deserve to take care of myself. You're supposed to be doing these things and you don't. And I think that can put pressure on you, actually, that's not healthy. You got to do self-care. You got to take care of yourself. Yes. And so finding little ways to do that, I know that my coaching was part of my self-care. Having that routine, having that outlet, a wonderful part-time job that didn't feel like a job. It feels like a calling. And that was self-care. Little things to take care of yourself.
So just for fun, I have a speed round of questions I just wanted to get your first impressions on. So what would you tell your younger self?
It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. Don't stress. Failure is okay.
The term do-over is commonplace today. Is there anything in your life you'd like to claim as a do-over?
In my life, there are so many, they are not countable. It took me 25 years to get my diploma, my college degree. I wish I would have known more about the brain wiring, because it would have helped a lot. I think I would take more advantage of the chances that I had. And I'm a musician, and I wish that I had practiced more.
What's on your bucket list these days?
Taking a train trip this summer is on my bucket list. When I turn 66, I want to take a road trip on Route 66, which I love. And I collect postcards and send them to people. And so I would love to actually have 200 at least postcards sitting next to me in a drawer. Another thing that I would like to do is I would like to go back to Ireland. I've been there before. I've been to my ancestral hometown, and there's a writers' festival in North Kerry, which is where my ancestors are from. And I'd really like to go to the North Kerry Writers' Festival sometime. But before I do that, I need to become a famous writer. That's on my bucket list too.
As Nike would say, just do it.
Just do it. And another thing is, since Mom died, I've been thinking of all these things. Where's my life going next? Writing more. I mean, the other day I was reading our friend Amy Grant's book that she wrote a long time ago called Mosaic, and I found it on my shelf, and I realized, you know what? I've already written a book. Amy's is a collection of essays, as are Margaret Renkel's best-selling books. But taking things that you've already written, which I have been doing for a long time. And also, I'm in front of this microphone and wearing these headphones because I'm investing in equipment for a future podcast.
Well, we will absolutely stay in touch on all of this. And I think that you have so much talent. You're going to do big things. And I have two more questions that I want to ask. One is, what is one piece of advice that your parents or an older adult might have shared with you and at the time you thought was silly, or you might have thought it was silly, but now that phrase rings true in your everyday life?
I can't think in particular of one phrase, but I had something lived in front of me, and I have a phrase for it now. And it's, never let a kind thought go unspoken. My dad used to, if we were out to dinner somewhere and there was a busboy doing a good job, my dad would call him over and say, "You are doing a great job. I want to talk to your manager. Go get your manager." And so, I'll cry when I say this too, the manager would come out, "Is everything okay?" My dad would say, "Yes. And your employee, Mike, here is doing such a great job. He deserves a raise." And of course, the manager would be happy and that guy would be glowing. And that was lived out in front of me all my life. And so that's how I try to live. And I love talking to strangers, being a natural extrovert, a bookish extrovert, though. And to listen to people's stories is to love them and to be able to look them right in the eye, which can be such a great gift. There's a Cindy Morgan, Amy Grant song that Amy recorded about greeting the day. And a little prayer of hers is, "Lead me to the ones I need and to the ones who are needing me." That's just the morning prayer. Lead me to the ones I need and to the ones who need me. And in there is speaking your kind thoughts, being vulnerable and saying things that you don't know how they're going to be responded to, but it's a means of grace.
Mm-hmm. So, Bernie, one final question. What is it that you do to squeeze the day?
Well, I yodel.
You do
I
not.
yodel. Yes, I do. I yodel. I whistle. This is a weird thing to say, but when I was in the depth of depression and I would find myself whistling, I knew that I was going to be okay. Because my dad was a great whistler. I'm a good whistler. We used to whistle in harmony. And if I had advice to give to anyone who's more than 50 forward about things that you can do that you've never done before, learn to yodel, learn to whistle, learn to do something you've never done before, because it is never too late. It's never too late. Just do it.
Thank you so much for joining us today. Your story is inspiring and reinforces that challenges can become opportunities. We learn so much from one another and certainly from the experiences of those in their second chapter of life. Now we challenge everyone listening to go squeeze the day. Squeeze the Day is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy this podcast, please help us continue to share inspiring stories of older adults and visit 50forward.org to make a contribution. That's FIFTYFORWARD.org. Let's support, champion, and enhance the lives of older adults together.